what I wanted to do was launch the company, see if we had idea market fit, but actually charge people to join that wait list.
And what happened?
We did about $200,000 of revenue
On the waiting list revenue.
on the wait list.
Oh my gosh. Well, welcome everyone. Stoked to be here for another IO Snack podcast episode with John Andrew Entwistle. Did I pronounce it right?
You nailed it. Absolutely.
Nailed it. Glad to have you, man. This is going to be a fun convo. John Andrew is the CEO and founder of Wander, which I think is one of the most fascinating businesses in all of tech. And just like we did with Brandon Rodman last week, Wander made our exceptional startups list, which we hope can help you guys recruit some folks and get your name out even more than it is. But we're going to have a fun convo, 30, 40 minutes long. I want to cover kind of early Wander insights, and then I want to spend the bulk of it teaching founders what makes Wander unique and lessons that you've learned operating, and then we'll wrap up in a few minutes after that.
Let's do it. I think this is going to be the best pod we have.
Oh,
so.
my man. Welcome. All right, so first question for everyone who is not familiar, what is Wander? What do you do?
So the way that I like to start it when I'm explaining the company is with a question, which is, have you ever had a bad vacation rental experience? And that's typically the reaction that we get. And so what does that mean? That means that you rent a house, it doesn't look like the photos, the beds aren't comfortable, the internet is bad.
Yep.
And so when I experienced that myself and was thinking, how could you solve that problem? What you end up with is a relatively complex solution to a simple customer need. And so for us, that's verticalizing the vacation rental market. So that's everything from the distribution platform, so wander.com, the Wander app to actually go and book one of these wonderful homes, to the underlying operating software that's actually running all of the operations that are happening across thousands of units. And so that's what Wander provides, is a really incredible customer experience with a whole bunch of software and operations underneath.
So, okay, that's fascinating. And it made me remember, are you familiar with this famous Keith Raboy tweet where he says the best way to win a market is to find a highly fragmented industry, make it verticalize, and raise the NPS? Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Is that kind of what Wander's doing for like short-term vacation rentals?
Yeah, so to give you an idea, Airbnb's NPS is 24.
Okay.
And Wander's NPS for Q1 is 86. To be clear, I think Airbnb is a wonderful company.
So do I.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why the delta though? Why 24 to 86? What are you doing to make it so much better?
So when we started the company, we looked at every complaint that folks had in the industry. And you had the quality of the underlying inventory, the consistency of the operations, and then the complexity or the comprehensiveness of the underlying customer support.
Yeah.
And so what we did is take all of the various tooling, all the various different players, and combine all of that so that you had the curation of the underlying inventory, you had this consistency of operations through software, and then we had a customer experience team, we called them concierge, that actually knew what was happening at the property so that they could truly help you in certain circumstances.
I would guess the main complaints folks have with Airbnb, and again, we're not to rip on Airbnb, is more like, I didn't like the way the host handled this. I did not like how it wasn't a consistent experience from the operations standpoint, check in, check out, whatever. So you basically fix all of that because you wrap it in the Wander brand and the Wander experience and make it consistent. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Our big thesis when starting the company was you had this historically human-heavy, logistically complex business.
Yep.
And could you have it scale at the speed of software with automation and AI? And that was a really contrarian bet 3+ years ago. I think now everyone has a thesis about services and AI and how those things mesh together. But when we started the company, you can imagine our pre-seed pitch of, I'm going to build a booking platform that rivals Airbnb. I'm going to put together a world-class brand, and then I'm going to build agentic operating software underneath to run everything. And I'm going to do so and deliver an experience that's 3 times better at the same margin profile.
I can see why that's pretty non-consensus. So did a lot of people hate that because you're positioning yourself against Airbnb in a way?
I would say that if I wasn't a second-time founder and the investors who invested in me at that stage hadn't worked with me before, it would have been, I think, something that very, very few people would have gone behind.
What do you think got them then? Was it the fact that you're a second-time founder, Teal Fellow, highly credible, all this?
Candidly, like, I'd love to tell founders that, like, you know, everything was super rosy, but it wasn't. You know, even being a second-time founder, I still had to convince folks who had worked with me for 5+ years.
Why this was a good idea.
Totally. And I think a lot of it is my previous company, Coder, hundreds of millions of dollars of enterprise value, started that company when I was like 17. I still need to show them, what I saw, and the fact that at the end of the day, when you have an idea, it's going to sound too early. It's going to sound, a little bit far-fetched. And so I think that that was the other thing, was convincing people that this was an inevitability.
So the non-consensus thing was this idea that you could actually build a better, higher-end Airbnb and then wrap it in a brand and experience that provides a whole overall better product.
You also had a lot of questions about the underlying business strategy. So I think that today you have a lot of investors, a lot of founders questioning, what does the future of software look like? What do the future of companies look like as you have this giant wave of AI? And back then, I felt like having a platform, having a brand, having everything be verticalized was the only durable idea.
Yeah. Yep. I've got this this tweet that went a little viral that's essentially like, as software costs go down, the moat for software is gone.
Exactly
the
right.
one that remains is network, brand, scale, and data.
Yep.
And Wander kind of has all of those in a way.
Yeah, and that wasn't accidental. I mean,
That was deliberate. You thought that up front, that this would be what remains as valuable.
So Coder was one of the earliest companies working on AI-assisted coding. I remember me and my co-founders, it was one of the areas that we were exploring very early on. I had a thesis about the fact that software was just going to become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And to be clear, I do think you can build really great software companies. It's just now turned into a race of speed as opposed to like true technical moats.
Yep.
And so I wanted to make sure that I had a company that would leverage all of those and also touch the physical world as well, which was especially contrarian again.
At the time.
Yeah.
All right, so we also like to ask, obviously you're on this list that we talked about, so you're growing fast, but are there any other stats you'd want to share with folks that could be like, whoa, I had no idea Wander was doing so well?
Yeah, Wander has gone from a $5 million GMV run rate to $40 million in the last 18 months. We've been growing 30% month over month for the last 6 months on an inventory perspective. We 16x'd inventory over the last year. Our NPS is 84, I think, for Q1, which I know that number, it's kind of hard to comprehend, but it basically means that anyone who's stayed is yelling from the rafters, about how excited they are.
All right, I could go 10 different ways off of this one. Maybe let's go down the promoter way. Why are they yelling from the rafters? And let's even get specific. What have you built into the product or the experience specifically that causes someone to be like, I got to tell everyone I know to stay at Wander next time? Give us 3 or 4 examples.
So there's a really great quote around the idea of NPS is a measure of the delta between your brand promise and what you actually deliver. And for Wander, we try and have the whole company is built around this idea of you have this great house and you go and it's better than the photos and you get there and it's quality and consistent and clean. And so I think that is at the end of the day, the core thing that people are excited about is I was excited about this thing
and it beat expectation.
And it is real.
Okay. What specifically do you do to beat expectation? What do they love the most?
I think that it's about quality and care. So when you arrive at a Wander home, it's everything from all of the check-in instructions being incredibly clear for you in the app. It's about getting into the home and having the snack basket and the handwritten letter and the amenity kits and just those little touches.
Yep.
But then I think it's about making sure that the stay continues to be great. Again, to be talking with this 24/7 concierge that knows everything about you.
So this is an AI concierge or a human concierge?
It's a mix of the two.
Okay.
So we have about a 60% deflection rate where the AI is handling about 60% of the messages and then the rest are being elevated.
So I went to Mexico last week randomly with my kids for spring break, and I used this concierge guy for booking a ride to a horse trail that we went to.
Yep.
Would Wander be able to do that? How does that work?
Yeah. So today everything's really concentrated around the actual stay.
Okay, got
but
it.
where it's heading, as you sort of alluded to, is that everything around your experience is going to be a part of that system, from your flights to your rental car to your experience, dinner reservations, is all going to be through the Wander app.
So if I look through your NPS responses, I'd probably see the instructions were clear, the place was super clean, the concierge was helpful. Anything else that we're missing?
I would say that we're very fortunate that our users are going into the circumstance wanting to have a great time. Everyone books a vacation hoping to have a wonderful experience. And so I would say the other thing that you would see is a true sense of gratitude for the memories that people have.
I get that. Another question I've got is, there's probably some marketplace founders listening. How did you get your first 10 Wander locations? What'd you do?
Yeah.
Which side do you focus on? Supply, demand? Give us a quick summary.
It's a great question. So Wander has always been a little bit different in how we've launched our product. So I saw a lot of founders launching with waitlists and then those waitlists failing to convert. And I think that misled a lot of folks. I think it misleads a lot of investors. And so what I wanted to do was launch the company, see if we had idea market fit, but actually charge people to join that waitlist.
Okay. So you launched a website. It was a wait list, but you're asking for money?
That's correct. So we had 2 tiers. You could sign up for the wait list, and then you could pay us $100 and become a founding member. That gave you first access to the platform, a Wander hoodie, and to us showed a signal that we not only had people who were generally interested, it's so low friction to sign up.
And is this before you had any properties?
Yep, that's correct.
What year was this?
This was 2021.
Okay, and so did you have a pretty website, or was it just a form? And
yeah, so it was a pretty website, and then it explained like what the idea was behind the company, and that was it. And I was basically just like live tweeting what I was building.
And what happened? What happened in terms of the free signups versus the paid? What did you learn?
Yeah, so I think that we did about $200,000 of revenue in our first 2 or 3 months.
On the waiting list revenue?
On the wait list.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's how we knew that we had idea market fit. But then again, you have to deliver. And so the question was, how do you kickstart a marketplace? The way that we did it was exceptionally capitally intensive. So we actually owned the first few assets.
That's what I wondered. You first started buying these, right? Okay.
That's correct. Yeah.
Did you think you would do that the whole time, or was there a reason why you thought you'd buy early and then not later?
Yeah, so obviously there are those classic quotes, do things that don't scale, et cetera. The way that I looked at it is that I wanted to accelerate our timeline in terms of learning how it would work, delivering this quality, understanding the operations, being as close to our customers as humanly possible, both on the supply side and the guest side. And so ownership made sense in those early days. Our plan was to scale that out and then switch to third-party inventory. But obviously what happened in 2022 with massive bank collapses and all those things sort of accelerated our path to third-party inventory rather quickly. I think that we were probably one of the last big credit facilities that Credit Suisse had done. We raised a $100 million credit facility just before they exploded.
Oh, wow. How much of that facility did you end up spending versus winding that down and moving to the by owner or the rental by owner thing?
Yeah, it was relatively minimal.
Okay.
But as you would imagine, like for me as a founder, I've been building this company in what you would say is like relatively rocky period.
Yeah.
So the company started in mid 2021. We launched in 2022. So right at the start of this downward trend. And I had to take this company, this path that I had sort of outlined of we're going to scale this inventory slowly, we're going to own the inventory on platform, and adjust it to third-party inventory relatively quickly while banks are exploding, while venture capital had been entirely frozen, and still posting strong year-over-year growth. So it was quite the experience.
So if I look back now, it feels like this move to third-party inventory was like brilliant. It's like better in tons of ways. But I suspect you didn't feel that way at the time. You maybe thought it was worse and that you were taking a step backward. Or did you know it was going to be better?
The way that I look at things is, do you have a permission slip from your customers and from a unit economic perspective?
Okay.
And Wander was still very small when we made that adjustment. And so one of the things that concerned me was this idea of we were going to start scaling third-party inventory, which could scale much more quickly, but you had a lot less control.
So quality could go down.
Exactly. Very early systems. And of course, unknown unit economics. But at the end of the day, have to is a great master. And when the world changes and accelerates your plans, then you sort of double down and focus up. And it ended up all working out, but there was a lot of pressure on the team in that period to very quickly mature everything.
So has it turned out that as long as you can keep quality bar high, it's actually better in every other way. Is
Yeah,
that
so
been the case?
we're onboarding right now about $1 billion a month in real estate,
Holy cow.
which if you were to be doing that with owned inventory would be impossible. Our NPS has actually ticked up from those early days, but that is despite this third-party inventory.
Well, and then you don't need all the capital to go buy this stuff. You're capital light now.
Exactly right. Yeah, we're entirely asset light, 70+% margins, scaling really quickly. So the plan all worked out. I do have to say that the acceleration of that timeline, the market collapsing multiple times, in between, certainly caused some gray hairs.
yeah.
But yeah,
So let's go back to the story of you launching that wait list, offering a founding membership option, 200,000 in
Yep.
revenue.
yeah, 200, 300,000.
And then, so now you've got a problem though. You got to go find properties. And what'd you do then?
So it was very funny. I mean, in the early days of building a company, you have to get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
And so I got in the car and drove and started
In
looking
the Bay
at
Area?
houses. Yep. Yeah. So at the time I was living in Austin. And so I road trip out to the West Coast. I knew that I wanted our first property to be around the Bay Area because they were the ones, during COVID who were most locked down and really looking to get away. And so we went and purchased our first asset. No type of like crazy financing or anything along those lines, just like putting money where our mouth is, like, getting it up and running and then setting up the house. I mean, it was 24 hours a day.
Where was it?
It was in Gualala, so
Gualalas.
near Sea Ranch, about
yeah.
2 hours north of San Francisco.
Okay, that was your first one, and then
Yep.
but you only have one. Well, you have $200,000 worth of payments. That doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, so we launched with 3 locations, and you also have to remember. So at this point, there's photos of me like walking around gas stations with my laptop. I'm like pitching investors, like helping to build the product. Also, like literally 24-hour days, like scrubbing like the deck of the house ahead of like a photo shoot. So really like putting in the hours. And you have to remember, this is coming from, 6 months earlier, I was the CEO of a, growth stage company. And so, back to pre-seed, and I was having a blast. And so we got our second and third location, very similar, process, and we launched. And I will always remember the reactions. 50% of people were like incredibly excited, and the other 50% are your classic Twitter trolls who are like, "There's only 3 locations." And to us, 3 locations, it was like, "Hey, this is pretty good. Like there's some inventory here. Like we're off to the races. Guest experience was great. We added our 4th and 5th, and kept on growing from there. And now we'll have over 1,000 by end of month, and continuing to grow."
And from there on, the network started to grow, basically.
Absolutely.
You had solved the chicken and egg problem.
Yeah. Once we had solved the cold start problem, I mean, we had incredible idea market fit. Then we had initial inventory. I mean, Wander off the bat was generating like pretty meaningful revenue of those assets. I mean, we were always sold out.
If you wouldn't have asked for money on that waiting list, do you think Wander still works out or no? Do you think that was pretty key?
It would have still worked out, though. I think that you want to make sure that what you're building is correct. And as a second-time founder, I did not want to launch a company with 200,000 people on the wait list and none
of them
buys.
converts.
Yeah.
So how do you find out if they're going to convert? You ask them to part ways with their money. Otherwise,
right.
they're not doing an economic calculation. They're just doing a costless, emotional calculation. I can sign up and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. At the end of wait lists are exceptionally low friction. I mean, like the signal is good, but it's like it's so easy for someone to give you your email address, so it's just not super valuable.
So now, after you started scaling the marketplace, you solved the cold start problem. Now you're scaling it. What have been the 1 or 2 biggest hurdles to that? Is it just maintaining quality? What are the big things you've had to solve?
So there are 2 parts to the equation to have Wander be a successful company. The first is, can you deliver a customer experience that's radically better than what exists today? We had done that. Then the second piece was, can you do so at the same margin profile as an Airbnb? That's a longer and harder problem. And we were very fortunate. Nathan Potter, our CTO, had worked with me over at Coder, and we had this vision for, again, this idea of automating property management, everything from vendor coordination, communication, calendar management, ticketing, all these things we felt could be done with software. And so we got to work. And so beyond what I think the customer sees with Wander is this massive product that's coordinating all of these different things all around the properties for thousands of locations. And so that was a like really incredible technical challenge, and something that we've solved, which is pretty exciting.
It also goes back to your thesis around software alone will be less valuable than software tied to physical goods. But the fact that you have physical goods, like in Wander's case, these rental homes, doesn't mean you're not building tons of software. You've probably built a bunch of technology in order to support the marketplace, but it's the marketplace that's probably going to have the enduring value. You agree?
The way that I look at it is, what is the best way to monetize any given product or unlock?
Yeah.
And so if you look at what Wander's doing today, so we have about a 30% average take rate on a transaction.
Okay.
Average order value is about $5,200. So
And is that like every stay someone you take
That's
30%?
correct.
Okay.
And so if you were to compare that to, $1,500 per transaction, and of course there's hundreds of transactions, for any given unit, et cetera. If you were to compare that to monetizing $20 a month for this piece of software, it's just not really the same.
100%. Kyle knows this, but Sterling and I worked at Divvy, and the magic of Divvy, everyone actually misunderstands. You give the software away for free, and you actually monetize these businesses at 20 times the rate you could have monetized had you charged for software.
Exactly right.
And you're talking about the same thing. It's like a business model innovation on top of a product innovation. And I think that's what makes special companies.
Exactly right.
So I'd love to know a couple of things that make you and how you run the business unique. What do you guys do that's weird, if anything?
Wander, I would say, is definitely not the norm in a bunch of different respects. So like some examples, we don't allow recurring meetings in the company. I think that it's basically like a subscription to waste time.
Okay. How do you enforce that? You just tell people and then hope they do it, or you actually check
Well, I
them?
wouldn't say that it's hope. I'd say that it's like a directive.
Okay. Yeah, got it. Don't do it or else. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not as threatening as that. If someone did do it, I really want to understand why. So like having a very meeting-like culture is something that's important to us. We also have an incredibly asynchronous culture. I believe this idea of, being in flow and having it so that if you need to talk to someone, that they're not in a meeting. You can
By the way,
just
that's
reach
pretty
out.
controversial, right? Because a lot of people, myself included, really bias towards in office and all that. You take the opposite side?
So to be clear, like I do think that you can have both types of cultures be true, whether remote or in office. Like I'm sure if I was to audit your organization, that people wouldn't complain about being in meetings 8 hours a day, that they have plenty of time to get their work done. Versus there are lots of remote companies where people are in meetings all day. So I wouldn't say that.
So
it's
you
remote versus
separate the
office.
2 points, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. To be clear, like I do think that in office cultures are great, and now that sort of the pandemic related requirements have been lifted, I love seeing. I mean, obviously we're in office, and so I'm definitely excited to be here, but it's a mix.
What do you think are the top 3 metrics you use to manage the business? What are you watching most closely to know if the marketplace is healthy?
Yeah, I would say revenue and revenue growth is certainly number one.
Yep.
Then it would be net promoter score, making sure that customers are happy. And then I would say it's unit economics. So like, what is the margin profile?
Yeah, contribution margin specifically. Okay. You might have had more thoughts on what you do that's unique. You talked about the culture of asynchronous. You talked about the no recurring meetings. Anything else? I interrupted you.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things, like for example, we have this this tool that we call the progress tracker that has every individual's goals in the entire company broken up by department. And what that allows for me as a solo founder is to read through the thousands of individual things that every single person in the company is working on without having to have this like one-on-one type culture. And I would say that that's also relatively.
So are
unique.
people adding to that every week, or how does it work in practice?
So it's on a monthly sprint. The whole company's on a monthly sprint. Each individual will have anywhere between 20 to 40 unique goals, and they flip them red or green depending on if they got them done. And what's really nice is every single person in the company knows exactly what every other person is working on. You have literally thousands of goals across the org.
How has that transparency helped or hurt? I can imagine there's a trade-off there by showing what everyone works on.
I would say that the transparency is useful because it shows that everyone else is putting in the work. Like we have one of our company virtues is there are no weak links, and that's because everyone in the company is a shareholder. And so that each and every day people are showing up and getting it done, and how each individual thing ties into the broader vision.
That's fascinating. I've had this idea. It's almost like an Elon Musk, what did you get done this week type of transparency across the whole company. I think it's very, very smart. And you want startups to be a place where everyone knows what everyone else is doing. Otherwise, it kind of breeds this distrust among teams. And is that what you've seen? People start to see oh, that guy's all in. I'm all in. I know what he's doing. Is that the benefit?
I would say that for Wander, we've done this since the beginning, and so everyone,
it's just part of it.
It's part of the culture. I would say the other nice thing is that I believe that like in school and in society, you grow up with this idea of like valid excuses. Like you show up late to school and someone tells you like, if you give them a note, they're like, oh, that's a valid excuse to be late or not. In reality, in the real world, like there are no valid excuses. You either got done what you needed to get done or you didn't. Like no matter what happened in the world, there's no valid excuse.
Yeah.
Like because there's no judge.
There's a reason, but there's no excuse.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the thing with this is that like it either your goal goes green or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then we need to work on it and collaborate to get it done. But I think that like removing this sort of like reality distortion around progress is really valuable.
How do you ensure that the goal's good enough, that it's aggressive enough, that they're not sandbagging? What do you do to stress that?
Yeah, so each department leader is responsible for that dynamic. So you need to have a really great executive team. But I am also looking at each and every goal that is set in the company. And if I feel that something isn't aggressive enough or doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think that's the key is you can't know every individual's, whether it's the right aggression. Therefore, you have to delegate that to a great leader so they can know, and it comes back to having the right team.
Absolutely. Basically. Yeah, and I mean, to be clear, like you're not penalized for being ambitious. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing wrong with someone flipping a certain percentage of their goals red. The thing that I look for is they're organized from most important to least important. And so I want to see the most important goals flip
get done. That's pretty controversial, or I guess unique. What else? Anything else that you guys do that you want to share? Or does that cover it? Probably.
I'm sure there's plenty of other things. Maybe bringing on one of our executives would be a good way to get the second half.
That's probably a good idea. Let's wrap up a little bit. I want to learn more about what this turns into. I mean, it's pretty clear that you can expand to these. I call it the horse riding experiences. But what does Wander look like in 10 years? And then I'm going to ask you. Let's assume I'm a potential candidate that wants to work there. What's your pitch to me to come join you guys now?
Absolutely. I think that for potential candidates, like Wander is a very hardworking startup. And so you have to have a deep passion about what it is that we're working on and also an appreciation for freedom. For us, like, I don't mandate that people wake up at 8 a.m. and show up at this time. Like you have freedom of your day to accomplish your goals. Yeah. And I think that like some people thrive in that environment and other people struggle. And there's also a mutual respect. Like I respect our employees to do what they say they're going to do and like not be taken advantage of in that dynamic. From a 10-year plus vision perspective, you can see where Wander is headed in the interim. There are about 250,000 Wander-worthy locations across the globe. We have
Wander-worthy, is that what you said? Okay.
And so there's about 1,000 of them on platform today. And so you'll have the aggregation of all of that inventory, which creates incredible value in the marketplace. Then concierge will become more capable, everything from your rental car to your flights to your itinerary, all those things put into the Wander app for you to go and experience said stay. And then I think the big question is, how do we leverage our distribution moat? I think one thing that people don't think about often is that, Wander has a distribution moat to hundreds of thousands of, wealthy travelers, but we also have a distribution moat to the owners of these homes. And so if you have, 200,000 high net worth individuals who own these $5 million houses, there's lots of different products and ideas that start to become interesting in that realm.
Anyone that you'd share that tease a little bit of what you could do or no?
There are so many different products and services you can offer around their individual homes, mostly like around the fintech idea. Mm-hmm. So you have lending, insurance, et cetera. I think that one thing that's interesting and non-obvious in a Wander world is, does Wander offer its agentic property management capabilities to others? You could imagine like your house or your apartment being like, hey, can you send the cleaners?
100%.
Yeah. And that's also very interesting.
We haven't talked much about the benefits to these property owners because they're owned by third parties, and then we'll wrap up. But I am curious, They love this because they get a hands-off property management experience, but they still make a bunch of money. And maybe, do they make more money than they would having it not on the platform, I assume? Or
Yeah, so Wander owners outperform the market anywhere between 20 to 30%.
wow, even net of your fee.
Yep.
So it's a win-win, clear win for everybody.
Yeah, it's a clear win. I would say too, you do have those other values, like you have the values of the tooling, the distribution, the quality of care. But at the end of the day, what we strive for is this idea that if you can deliver value to the guest, then they're willing to pay more to have this level of consistency and quality of care. And that flows through to the owner. And then you have this beautiful flywheel of more guests equal more locations equal more guests. And that continues.
You said there's 250,000 that are high enough bar. What is a Wander quality bar? How do you determine one's good enough? Are you just trying to get the top 1% of properties worldwide, basically? Is that the goal?
There's lots of different variables that go into it, relatively sophisticated. So revenue potential, amenity set, location. But then there are also sort of the less measurable, or I would say used to be less measurable. So we actually have a system that looks at the photos of each home and basically scores it against effectively a rubric that I created. So imagine two sets of properties. I score one, and then the AI scores the other, and they have to match. And so that's what actually determines that threshold.
Okay, now I got to ask another one, because Sterling said that I should ask you, Wander appears to really care about taste, judgment, design. You just mentioned that you're grading properties off of what you like the most. So first question is, do you agree that like taste is going to be a differentiator in the future, and it is for Wander? And then second, how do you scale that type of taste so that it's not just you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, when you think about a brand, it's a brand promise. And then you have to think about, well, who is making that promise? And at the end of the day, it's the leadership and the team.
That's right, yeah.
From a scalability perspective, I think I mentioned a great example where when we were calibrating our machine vision system to do the initial scanning for these leads, I was given a list of 100 homes and I rated them on a score of 0 to 100. And then we fine-tuned the AI to match that based on those variables. And so it's not me reviewing. That system has now reviewed almost 150 million units.
But it was trained on you, basically.
Yeah, effectively.
Yeah. All right, man. Last question for you is this. The founders we talked to are obviously unreasonable in some way. You're a repeat founder. You're starting a very hard business in a marketplace, which is like startups on hard mode. What drives you? Why are you the way that you are?
Obviously, when it's 3 a.m. and you've pulled, 4 or 5 days in a row like that, you ask yourself that same question of like, why do I like this so much? What is it about me? And when I've rooted it down to like when I was a kid, my pop was a single dad, lawyer, best guy in the world. And he took care of my sister and I. And I have this very distinct memory of waking up in the middle of the night, walking downstairs and seeing him on his computer working. And it kind of clicked for me in that moment to see just that, like, how hard he was working to take care of my sister and I, and how that behind the scenes, like, he was putting in the hours and also, of course, looking after us. And so I think it was like I wanted to work like dad. And so I think that that's what instilled that idea in me. The second piece then is like, why do you keep going? And ultimately, it's all about pride. Like, I want to make our employees proud. I want to make our customers proud. I want to make our shareholders proud. Like, I just want to do the best job that I can each and every day. And I found that what's interesting about that source of motivation is that it seems to be like never ending. And it also is just like, I think, just a lot better than like trying to get a jet or something along those lines.
This has been awesome, man. Thanks for the convo. And for those who are curious about working at Wander, using a Wander, where should they go?
Yeah, our website is wander.com, and then on the socials, it's just @wander. So feel free to check us out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.